Now will I play the wild rover no more.
Hello, welcome on this Friday evening to what promises to be a very special event. I'm Maddie Leadham and this is Tom Harrison, and we're going to hello. We're going to be joined by Bruce Lindsay, who's a social historian, freelance music journalist. He's a semi-professional musician. He's got a PhD in history from the University of East Anglia. He's the author of 2 books, and most importantly for tonight, he is one of the first individuals to have explored in depth the lives and music of Norfolk traditional singers Harry Cox and Sam Larner and their lasting influence on the British folk scene. He's gathered his findings together and published it in the book Two Bold Singermen and the English Folk Revival, The Lives, Song Traditions and Legacies of Harry Cox and Sam Larner. And we have the cover of the book here, if we can just see that. Yeah, there it is. And it's an extremely interesting read, and I would recommend that to any folk music lover. It's really, really good. And so I'd like to welcome Bruce.
Hi, good evening.
Hello,
everybody.
Bruce.
Hi. How are you?
I'm sure.
I'm fine, thank you. Fine.
Excellent. Bruce, I'll just quickly ask, what inspired you to write this book?
I've been aware of Sam and Harry since I was in my late teens, I suppose, when I wasn't living in Norfolk. Listened to folk music in the intervening years, and then spent a lot of my time writing about jazz, blues, electronica, hip hop, R&B, and all sorts of other stuff, but not folk. And then a few years ago, I started listening to more and more folk music, and I thought, well, you know, Harry and Sam are from Norfolk. Now I live in Norfolk. I should find out a bit more about them. And it proved relatively difficult to find out a lot more about them. There are some quite extensive sleeve notes to a couple of their albums, but in total, that's maybe, 20 pages on each man. And so I ended up writing the book so I could find out more about Harry and Sam. Was lucky enough to get a publishing contract from Equinox Publications, who specialise in music and popular music history, and just dug on from there, really.
They do say that if you want to find something out and it's not there, that it's sort of then your responsibility to find out for it. And obviously that fell on you, which is
Maybe
really,
yeah.
I'm very grateful that you did, though, because it's really interesting. If any of our viewers wish to leave a comment or ask a question, there are, if you say on your YouTube or Facebook Live, if you leave a comment there, we can see it and we'll read it out and hopefully answer as many as we can. Just say that before we properly begin. And I think that we should probably begin with why we're talking about Harry and Sam. So why are they relevant to us? And I suppose the best way to do that would be to show an archival recording of Harry singing a song that I think most of us would recognise. It's called The Black Velvet Band.
In a neat little town called Belfast, apprentice to trade I was bound. And many a hour and sweet happiness have I spent in that neat little town, till bad misfortune came over me and caused me to stray from the land, far away from my friends and relations, betrayed by the Black Velvet Band. Her eyes, they shone like diamonds, I thought her the queen of the land, and her hair it hung over her shoulders, tied up with a black velvet band. I took a stroll down Broadway, meaning not long for to stay, and who should I see but a pretty fair maid come tripping along the pathway. She was both fair and handsome, her neck it was just like a swan, and her hair it hung over her shoulders, tied up with a black velvet band. Her eyes they shone like diamonds, I thought her the queen of the land. And her hair it hung over her shoulders, tied up with a black velvet band.
Really
Sung
lovely.
like I've not heard it sung before.
It's an immediately recognisable song, though. I mean, I think
It's brilliant.
Anybody who's been near a session in Ireland or in any one of the faux Irish pubs that are dotted around the world will have heard it and probably joined in with it and thought, "Oh, I love these Irish songs."
Try
And
Norfolk, you'll hear it here as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But I think the interesting story about that song is that Harry isn't singing the Dubliners version. The Dubliners are singing Harry's version. I mean, Harry was recorded by Ewan MacColl, the great collector, singer and songwriter, probably best known now for writing First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. But he collected from Harry in the 50s and established a series of workshops for singers and folk musicians in London. And one of the people who attended that workshop was a guy called Luke Kelly. Luke Kelly went back to Ireland eventually after a couple of years and took with him Harry's arrangement, Harry's version of Black Velvet Band, put a group together, called it the Dubliners, and that became one of their trademark songs. So everybody assumes, sweet little town they call Belfast is the opening line. It's an Irish song, but in fact, the earliest versions of that don't mention Belfast. They mention a few other towns. Belfast came in relatively late as the town of the story. But I think that's why people like Sam and Harry are important, because they brought to a time when people could record them for posterity. They brought performances of songs that were in some cases just a few years old, but in many cases 200-300 more years old, and they've now become part of what's known as the folk canon or the folk repertoire.
So it was them that sort of brought it out there, like the Dubliners, they wouldn't have done it without them, because I thought it was the Dubliners song originally until I read the book.
Yes,
and so it's really nice to hear the actual origins.
Yes, I mean, I think it's very difficult to exactly trace the to and fro of many of these songs that have been around for generations. But all I'm willing to say is that version of Black Velvet Band was recorded by Ewan. Ewan played it to people, including Luke Kelly, and Luke took it back to Dublin. And acknowledged that much. Ewan wrote about the episode of one of his own books and said that he'd spoken to Luke, and Luke had acknowledged that it was Harry's version.
I'm probably getting well ahead of ourselves, but how many songs did he collect? He didn't write any, did he?
He wrote a song, which is called Threshing Time. And I've only ever heard a snippet of a couple of verses that Peter Kennedy recorded in the late 50s. But no, he gathered songs from various different places. Harry's repertoire was well over 100. There's debate about exactly how much over 100, because of course not all of them were recorded. But if you look at what he recorded, look at the manuscripts that he collected and the cuttings of song lyrics that he collected, then you're getting well into the high hundreds, 150, 160 plus.
Amazing.
Sam, not quite so much. Sam's repertoire was probably about 60 or so.
Still quite extensive.
It's pretty extensive, yeah.
Yeah. Were there any other songs or famous artists that we might know that they took songs from Harry or Sam?
Well, I guess in terms of artists that were influenced by them and took songs from them, the best known, Martin Carthy would be an obvious one. I mean, Martin, who's still kind of the doyen of English folk singers now in his 80s, tells the story of sort of almost accidentally going with a friend to, I think, one of Ewan MacColl's pub concerts and seeing Sam Larner on stage. Ewan devoted the night to Sam Larner. And Martin, who was at the time, I think, an assistant stage manager in theatre and thinking about being an actor, heard Sam singing, was transfixed by this at the time. Man in his late 70s, I think he's about 78, singing and telling stories of his life at sea and his life as a fisherman and so on, and particularly by a song that Sam always called Henry Martin, which is also called Lofty Tall Ship, which is a kind of pirate shipping disaster, battle at sea kind of song. And Martin says, time and time again, he's told this story to many people, including myself, that was the night that Martin walked out and said, no, I'm going to devote, because he'd been a skiffle musician. So he came out and said, no, I'm going to be a folk singer. So without Sam, Martin would not have been there. And the link I make, however tenuously perhaps, in the book is that Martin became a leading light of the folk scene, and a few years later these upstart young Americans came over to get a bit of what was going on in London, and they met Martin, and Martin took them under his wing, and Martin taught them songs, and one of them was Paul Simon and one of them was Bob Dylan. And so you can argue that without that night in the now unknown pub when Sam Larner turned Martin Carthy onto English traditional song, Bob Dylan and Paul Simon wouldn't have had Martin's tutelage, and they might have turned out a little bit different themselves.
What a fascinating connection.
Yeah. I'd love to know what Sam Larner and Harry Cox thought of Bob Dylan and Paul Simon. I suspect.
Before or after he went electric?
I think Sam might have liked Dylan more after he went electric, because Sam was quite into that whole performance thing. Harry was more of a purist. Harry wouldn't have been too keen on the presence of a guitar, let alone an amplifier as well. Yeah.
So that's obviously we've just seen that Bob Dylan and Paul Simon were potentially indirectly influenced by Harry and Sam, but we've still got artists today who are being directly influenced them. We've got Gemma Kawaja, who you mentioned in your book. She's a traditional singer, and she has got a lot of her repertoire taken from Harry Cox and Sam Larner, and we've actually got a clip of her singing The Ghost Ship, which is one of Sam Larner's top songs, I believe. And unfortunately, because of time restrictions, we can't play the whole song, so it's not the full story, unfortunately, but here's a little snippet of Gemma's The Ghost Ship.
Great.
This song is called The Ghost Ship, and I learned it from the singing of Sam Larner. It's actually got loads of different names, this song. Sam's version, he calls it The Ghost Ship, but I've heard versions, the same kind of story in folk songs, called The Cruel Ship's Carpenter, Polly's Love, there's one with murder in the title, so various names for this one. It is a murder ballad, so it's quite an interesting one. Now the Queen, she wants sailors to sail on the sea, which made pretty Polly to sigh and to weep, saying, William, dearest William, don't you go to sea. Please remember the vows which you gave unto me. It was early next morning, before the break of day. Young William got up, and these words he did say, Oh, Polly, pretty Polly, you must come along with me. Before we are married, my friends, for to see. So we led her through bushes and valleys so wide, which made pretty Polly to weep and to sigh, crying, William, dearest William, you have led me astray, on purpose my innocent life to betray. Oh yes, pretty Polly, 'tis true all you say, for all this long night I've been digging your grave, and the grave it being open with a spade standing by, which made pretty Polly to weep and to cry. Oh, pardon, dear William, my innocent life, for I'll never regret for to be your dear wife. I will travel o'er England all over to set you free. Please remember the vows which you gave unto me. No pardon, no pardon, no pardon I'll give. And with that he drew out a long daggered knife. He stabbed her to the heart, and the blood did down flow. Then into the grave her fair body he did throw.
She's got such a nice voice.
Yeah, it was lovely. Yeah. In fairness, I should flag up the fact that Polly does get her own back. The clue's in Sam's title for the song, because the ghost of Polly appears on board ship when William is at sea and disembowels him. So that'd be a lesson.
Well, sadly, we cut that part out. It's a shame. That would have been really interesting. But Gemma's based in Norfolk now. I think she's originally from the Midlands, but she's now based in Norfolk. And I'm from Staffordshire, and I hadn't really heard of Harry and Sam before I read your book. But are they quite well known in the Norfolk area?
They are internationally known in the folk scene. I think they've tended to be a bit forgotten in the general population around Norfolk now. And they still have the champions. I mean, Keith Skipper met Sam at one point, the journalist and raconteur. I suppose it's more of a folk scene fame rather than a local fame, and they are a bit forgotten, sadly. I mean, you'll hear part of the issue is you'll hear their songs sung by many contemporary singers like Gemma, like Georgia Shackleton, who I think is coming on in a little while. John Bowden from Bellowhead, and people of the repertoire is spread around lots of contemporary singers, some of whom took their versions directly from Sam and Harry, some of whom have kind of amalgamated versions. So I'd like to sort of think they'd be a bit better known locally from now on, because they deserve to be better known. If you talk to people about famous Norfolk singers of the 1950s and 60s, regrettably, the name that tends to come up is the Singing Postman. It wasn't even born in Norfolk and didn't even have his post round in Norfolk, I don't think.
I like some of his songs, though.
Oh, he's quite an amusing guy, and actually. Stone Angel, a band who I think we're going to play at the end of the evening. Yeah. Their guitarist used to be a session player in the studio where the Singing Postman did a lot of his records. So there you
go. Let's hear it for the Singing Postman.
There is a plaque on Sam's house, isn't there? I think we've got a picture of it here. So that obviously it's in Winterton, I think he's from.
Yeah, I'm assuming the plaque is still there. I've not been to that part of Winterton for about a year or so, but yes, it was a blue plaque put up by the Great Yarmouth and District Archaeological Society, I think in about 2014 or so, or 2015, to show his little cottage in Winterton, quite near the church, in the centre of the village, to show that he lived there, and of course to show what he's probably best known for as an individual, and that's Singing the Fishing, the radio ballad that Ewan MacColl, Peggy Seeger and Charles Parker developed as one of a series of radio ballads that they did in the 50s and 60s.
We will be talking or seeing that a bit later.
Good.
So just before we overlap, I think that probably it's a good time to maybe show another individual who's been influenced, and that's who you've mentioned, Georgia Shackleton. She's actually sent us a little clip of how she's been influenced by Harry and Sam with a little tune that she's written. So I think we'll play that now.
So I first heard the singing of Harry Cox, Sam Larner, Walter Pardon and their peers about 12 to 15 years ago. I didn't realise at the time what a big impact they would end up having on my career. And it was maybe over the period of a couple of years that followed from hearing them first sing, that I became aware that maybe music from East Anglia isn't as widely represented throughout the English folk scene as music from other parts of the UK and other traditions. And I reflected on why that might be. Arguably there were lots of different reasons. But it was at that point that I decided that I was going to make much more of an effort to be performing music from our region. I'm glad I made that decision because I really enjoy it, and there's a lot of great stuff. I was therefore really thrilled when Bruce got in contact to have a chat about his book. I was delighted to hear that this book was being written, and I was really excited by the fact that this book was being written. I think that it's going to do really good things for getting some of our East Anglian music out there as more and more people read this book and discover the rich tapestry of material that we have here in East Anglia. When I was having a chat with Bruce, he told me a lovely story about Harry Cox being a big animal lover and about a seagull that he nursed back to health. And I thought, well, I have to write a tune about that. So I wrote a tune that I'll play for you now, Harry's Seagull. Bruce asked me to send him the dots for this actually after I wrote it, and I did. However, I have since rewritten this, Bruce, so the dots that you have are very different. Being a musician, quite often you'll write a tune or a song and you think, yeah, I've cracked it, this is ace, everyone must hear this, it's brilliant, and then the next day, no, it's in the fire. So this is Harry's Seagull Mark II. I'll play this after the Yarmouth hornpipe because I wrote this tune after fiddling around with the first bar of the Yarmouth hornpipe and putting it in a minor key. So this tune was kind of written around that little theme, that motif. So first off, the Yarmouth hornpipe. There are loads of Yarmouth hornpipes. This one is more widely known perhaps as the Manchester hornpipe. So I'll play that once and then I'll go into Harry's Seagull.
Lovely.
Lovely. That was great.
I suppose it shows that not only are artists still taking the songs from Harry and Sam, but they're actually writing songs about them, just showing their influence and how powerful it really is.
Yeah. It was nice to see Harry and Sam on George's wall, by the way. I don't know if...
yeah, I spotted that.
There's a picture of each of them there, which is lovely.
For anyone who doesn't know, Georgia is part of the band, the Shackleton Trio, who are a really quite good band, and they're quite out there. So it's quite something that Harry's having songs written about him by then. And I suppose now we've talked a little bit about the impact that Harry, Cox and Sam Larner have had on the folk scene, but now it's probably ideal to talk about why they've had that, what makes them so special. And a lot of that is attributed to the English folk revivals, isn't it?
Yes, it's a lovely term. Some people will argue till they're blue in the face that there's no revival because it never died in the first place, which I kind of agree with, I think. Normally, I think the generally recognised thing is that there were two folk revivals. The first one was around the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, where people like Percy Grainger and Kate Lee and Ralph Vaughan Williams and Cecil Sharp and others started collecting songs and tunes from performers that they visited in various parts of England. And that's where we tend to get the first written record of what is seen as traditional English songs and tunes. And in some cases, Percy Grainger was, I think, the first. We get recordings, cylinder recordings, audio recordings as well. That tailed off in the years after after the First World War, as collectors moved on. In some cases, sadly, like George Butterworth, the collector and composer, were killed in the First World War. And things went into abeyance over the 30s and 40s. And then after the Second World War, you start to get a revival of interest in English folk or traditional, or some people call it vernacular music. But this time, it's much more performer-oriented. And so you get the folk revival performers, many of whom I've already mentioned: Martin Carthy, Peggy Seeger, Ewan MacColl, Shirley Collins is another person heavily influenced by Harry, and she's still singing today and still very popular today, as is Peggy. In fact, Peggy Seeger was on Jules Holland's Later only a fortnight ago. So you get the revival split into two. Now, the first revival pretty much missed Sam in total. Didn't capture Sam at all, and only got hold of Harry in the last few years.
I think we've got a picture of Harry Cox in naval uniform. It would have been around that time. It would have been World War One. Yeah. So he's still quite a young man there.
Yes, he was born in 85, and I think he went into the Navy. He went into active service in 1917. So he's about 35. Oh, my maths is failing me. 25, 35, about 40 actually.
But we know that him and Sam were musically active at this time. We've got an article that actually describes Sam in a concert. I think it's a smokers fishing concert. I think we've got an image of it. Fishermen's smoking concert. Yeah. So obviously they were around at this point, but why weren't they noticed?
I think Sam wasn't noticed because he wasn't in Norfolk when the collectors came calling. Sam was a fisherman from the vast majority of his working life. He signed on to his first fishing vessel when he was 13. So a lot of the time he wasn't in Norfolk. He was chasing the herring. He was going up the east coast of Britain as far as the Shetlands, and he was going round the top and down into the Irish Sea and round as far as the south coast of Ireland. So he was away a lot. Harry, they just missed him. They missed Harry at that time. Was living around Hickling Broad, around Catfield, Barton Turf, where he was born. He was sort of moving around that area, and the collectors never quite got to that bit of Norfolk.
Could it have been to do with their age as well? Were they not seen as experienced enough, or? Well,
Sharp and others did sort of declare that anybody who sings traditional songs properly is going to be old. So a young whippersnapper barely out of his 30s really wasn't worth bothering about. I think that's part of it. But just, they tended to go to one or two places. There was a lot of collecting done over towards King's Lynn in the west of the county. And there was some collecting done in the south around Winterton. There was some collecting done. Sam's uncle, James Larpin, had songs collected from him in, I think, 1915. But there must have been many singers who are missed. So, Sam was missed Sam was missed until he was in his 70s, as far as folk songs concerned. But he had this extraordinary first flourish of fame, if you like, in these fishermen's concerts in the Shetlands. And the Church Army set these concerts up in Lerwick, the main town of the Shetlands, I think probably to keep the fisher folk from causing havoc around the port when they were on their nights off. They had time on shore. So they had a reputation as hard drinkers, a lot of them. And certainly Yarmouth had a dreadful reputation for violence and crime when the boats were in, particularly the Scottish boats. I'd say that as a Scot myself. Normally virtuous people all, but they did have their moments. And Sam took advantage of these concerts in the Shetlands to perform as a music hall artist, not as a folk singer. He's written about in that clip you showed. I think he's written about in the Shetland newspapers as the well-known Winterton comedian and dancer, or the well-known song and dance man. And I think we're going to hear something of that kind of part of his repertoire later. But he won prizes in the Shetlands. I mean, he won prizes at these concerts for singing and dancing and telling monologues, a la kind of Stanley Holloway style monologues. Harry was basically singing at home, singing in the village pub, and singing at work at that time. And it was after the war that shortly after, there was a collector and composer called E.J. Moran, whose father was a parish priest, I think around Napton. And E.J. Moran was a keen collector of song, and he missed Harry before the war, but he came back to Norfolk after war service, which Harry and Sam both did. They were both in the Navy. And Moran was introduced to Harry and started collecting songs from him then. So this was about 1920.
What made them so appealing then when the second revival came around in the 50s and 60s?
Harry and Sam were appealing because, I mean, to be frank, they were still around. And a lot of the first revival singers that were collected were no longer with us. And the first singer to actually be recorded on cylinder and have a disc, a shellac disc released for public commercial purchase was a guy called Joseph Taylor from Lincolnshire. But he was already 70 when he was recorded in about 1907. So he died many years before. But Sam, Harry, some of the older Copper family down in Sussex, Phil Tanner over in Wales, and a few others were still around. So that was the first thing. You could hear directly from them the songs that they sang. And then you'd hear things like, the song that Gemma sang, The Ghost Ship. I mean, that's got a bit of romance which turns bad. It's got a murder. It's got a haunting. It's got a nautical theme. It's got a story that goes from start to finish. Yeah. It's a nice linear tale. And that appealed to that generation of young singers who'd come out of skiffle, a lot of them, like Martin Carfey did, like Frankie Armstrong, the great vocalist. She started in skiffle as well. They were wanting something with a bit more depth as a song, and a bit more Englishness in many cases. They wanted their own repertoire. And there you have Harry, well over 100 songs, still in pretty decent voice into his 70s, and still easily kind of able to track down. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, seemingly, at the age of 78,
we've got a picture.
Producer finds Sam.
Yeah, we've got a picture of him at that age, him with his wife Dorcas, and you can see that he's obviously quite an older man at this point.
And we've also the age he was when the age he was when he was discovered as a folk singer.
There's hope for us all.
Yes.
We've got a clip of the radio ballad that you mentioned before that you and McCall had, and obviously you can hear throughout it. I think it's A.L. Lloyd singing The Shoals of Herring, and then you've got Sam Larner describing his life as a fisherman. So you get that first-hand experience. I think we can hear a bit of that now.
Oh, it was a fine and a pleasant day, out of Yarmouth Harbour I was faring, as a cabin boy on a sailing lugger, or to go and haunt the shoals of Heron. Oh, the work was hard and the hours were long, and the treatment surely took some bearing. There was little kindness and the kicks were many, as we hunted for the shoals of Heron.
A rare old bulldog breed they were. They didn't care for nothing. Neither God nor man they didn't. They didn't, that's the truth. They were wicked old men. Now and again you'd find a kind old man with some arm or whatever. Cruel. You weren't allowed to speak, and they'd take and gear loose in it before they'd look at you. Put the rope on your backside if you're in trouble.
Oh, we fished the sword and the broken bank. I was cook and I'd a quarter sharing, and I used to sleep standing on my feet, and I'd dream about the shoals of Heron.
Brilliant. You can you can get a discussion like that today in the Harbour Room in Blakeney.
Yeah.
Shall I read out one or two of the comments that we've had? Which
yes, please.
So, hi everybody, learning a lot tonight. Such interesting social history, Bruce. Really enjoying the chat.
Thank you. Thank you.
Here we go. As well as missing Harry and Sam, Barry says they missed Walter Pardon as well. And I imagine there's one or two others we could add to that list.
Yeah.
Georgia, who of course played earlier on, and what a privilege that was, says Warwick, and well done. Gemma, great folk history, love it. Harry's accent, posh. Anyway, and there's more, we'll come back to them.
Lovely, thanks. Yeah.
Thanks everybody for sending those through. Anything that you want to send through, we'll try and find some time to put on there.
I noticed there's a comment just flagged up here from Ron Wood, who says he compares the moment when Moran met Harry Cox to the moment when Lomax met Leadbelly. And I agree. And I think in terms of importance and longevity of the relationship, they were key. I mean, I don't know what would have happened if nobody brought Harry to the pub where E.J. Moran was, and Moran had gone off because he moved to Ireland a couple of years later. If he hadn't collected Harry at that point, in the same, and in the 50s when Philip Donnellan walked into Winterton and said, "Does anybody know any singers round here?" And somebody mentioned Sam. I mean, they're kind of quite serendipitous moments, both of them, I think, because they certainly weren't pushing themselves to be found. And Leadbelly, I think, was in prison when Lomax found him. So these were not people, desperate to be found, desperate to be seen. They were found almost by accident.
Well, a big factor of the second folk revival was this focus on sort of working class, working life person. Like that's why Ewan MacColl did that radio ballad, wasn't it? It was celebrating the different working industries within the UK. And another thing, we've actually got a song here called Cruising Around Yarmouth. And would you say that counts as a sea shanty?
I am not going to get in the debate about what counts as a sea shanty. I am nowhere near qualified enough to talk about that. I believe that unless it's actually being sung on a boat or a vessel while people are undertaking hard manual work, then it's not a shanty.
Okay.
I'll let other people disagree with that.
I only say because there was obviously this focus on the working song, as well as there was a bit of a thing for sea shanties. And this song that Gemma's sent to us is about the sea, and it uses seafaring terminology, as you've said, seafaring terminology to thinly disguise the tale of a sexual encounter. And I think both Harry and Sam sing this song, or it's in their repertoire, I believe. So we've got this clip for you now.
This song is called Cruising Round Yarmouth, and I mainly learned this from the singing of Harry Cox. But this song is actually also in the repertoire of Sam Larner. It was a really popular song in East Anglia, and I still hear it sung a lot in the pub sessions and things all around this area. It's also known as the Maid of Amsterdam, but I much prefer the name Cruising Round Yarmouth. This is one of those songs that's just full of what I'd describe as good old-fashioned innuendo, so it's quite an amusing one to sing. And it goes like this. Was cruising round Yarmouth one day on a spree, young Jack met a damsel, the wind blowing free. I'm a fast-moving clipper, my kind sir, said she. I'm ready for cargo, my hold is quite free. Singing fal-de-ral laddie, right fal-de-ral day. Fal-de-ral laddie, right fal-de-ral day. What country she came from, he could not tell which, but by her appearance he thought she was Dutch. For her flag wore bright colours, her masthead was low, she was round at the quarter and bluff at the bow, singing fal-de-ral laddie, right fal-de-ral day. Fal-de-ral laddie, right fal-de-ral day. He gave her the rope and he took her in tow. From yard arm to yard arm, a towing they go. He lifted up her hatches, found plenty of room. So into her cabin he stuck his jib-boom, singing fal-de-ral laddie, right fal-de-ral day. Fal-de-ral laddie, right fal-de-ral day.
That's brought a few comments out. Mal, who sings a lot of that, censored when I sing this. We've got a wonderful programme and a delight to hear. Chance encounters in the pubs for music and for life in general. Oh, and here we go back to this whole sea shanty debate. And Max has a huge, long reflection on the discussion and says no. And he is an aficionado, so he should know.
I think one of the things you always think about is, could you actually do something whilst singing or listening to this song? And normally with the shanties, I think there's a distinct rhythm that allows you to haul in nets or pull up ropes or pull down sails. And Cruising Round Yarmouth doesn't really have that kind of rhythm to it.
But that song, based on what I've read in your book, that song seems quite fitting for Sam Larner, because he's a bit more of the fan of the bawdy song, isn't that right? Whereas Harry's a bit more into the...
Oh, Sam loved he was quite a fan of the double entendre if he couldn't get away with a single entendre. He liked his Rudens, Sam openly declares. Harry was a bit more reticent. We might come to that later in terms of how some singers would self-censor when they were singing to somebody they thought would be offended by the uncensored version of the song. And I think Harry did that on more than one occasion, whereas Sam was perhaps a little less inclined to do that. Maybe because of his music hall experience, when that sort of audience would not have wanted it censoring.
Well, you said in the book that the song that I think a lot of people will know, the song The Wild Rover, is perhaps an autobiographical song for Sam. It kind of reflects him. We have got a clip of that we can play now, and then you can sort of tell us why you think that it fits with him.
Yeah, sure.
I've been a wild rover for many long years. I I've spent all my money on wine, ale and beer. Now to give up all roving, put my money in store, and now will I play the wild rover no more. Nay, no, never, never no more. Now will I play the wild rover no more.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a certain sense of I don't know what it would be, a certain sense of regret in some of the ways Sam phrases that song. Because when you listen to Sam's interviews that he did with McCall and Peggy Seeger and others, he really plays up the wild rover side of his personality. When he was a young man on the fishing vessels, you know, he talks quite freely about how I had a girl in every port. I could always get a girl wherever we docked. You know, he always played up that kind of roguish element to his life as a younger man. Often when his wife Dorcas was present in the room, you can hear her saying, "Oh, you were an old bugger, Sam. You really were." And, I mean, Peggy Seeger described him, even at you know, coming on to 80 years old. Peggy Seeger described him as randy. You know, he really did play that up. So the Wild Rover and a couple of the other songs he sings, you can hear him kind of thinking, yeah, I can relate. This was me as a young man. I think he had a bit of a gleam in his eye, a bit of a sparkle in his eye, even, you know, as he was approaching his 80s.
Harry was quite different though, wasn't he? I don't know whether it was the fact that he wasn't in that hyper-masculine environment on the fishing boats, because he was obviously just a solitary farmer working alone. But what was Harry like in comparison?
Harry was much more, I don't say introverted. He was much happier in his own company. I mean, Sam was thrown together with other people by virtue of his work, right, until he you know, his work eventually wrecked his health when he was in his mid-50s and he had to leave. But he would be on these vessels with 6 or 7 fellow crew members for weeks at a time, docking in various ports where, you know, virtually everybody you came across was a trawlerman as well. So he did have this quite macho work, very, very hard labouring work. Harry's work was also hard labour. But it was in a different environment. He would work on his own a lot. He'd work in teams. He could work a plough team. He could run a threshing team. He could thatch. He could do pretty much anything, as he put it, in the agricultural way. And he earned his living as a self-employed labourer, thatcher, thresher, basket weaver for many years. But the lifestyle was different. Harry, say, was born in Barton Turf, lived in a few Broadland villages until he was kind of in his early 20s, by which time he was over towards Catfield, Potter Heigham, and he lived between those two villages, eventually settling down in a cottage on the border between Catfield and Potter Heigham. So a much more settled existence. I think that had a big difference. Although, you know, Sam married when he was relatively young. He was 25 when he married. Harry didn't marry until he was into his 40s.
Could you say that the song The Bonny Labouring Boy is almost a little bit autobiographical for Harry, or he maybe saw parallels with himself and that character, because it's about a hard-working farmer boy, and obviously the story is the love life, but it does refer to this man who works the land and he's hard-working.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think Harry didn't see himself in the protagonists of his songs, but he certainly related to the environment he was singing about in most cases. Yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah. Well, we've actually got Gemma Kawaja singing The Bonny Labouring Boy for us now.
This song is called The Bonny Labouring Boy, and I learned this from the singing of Harry Cox. In some places, I think that my words and my melody that I use deviate a little bit from what I originally heard Harry sing, but I think that's probably okay. I think that's part of the folk process. So anyway, this is The Bonny Labouring Boy. As I strolled out one morning, all in the blooming spring, I boy, for they would not let her marry with her bonny labouring boy. Young Johnny was a true love's name, as you may plainly see. Her parents, they employed him, the labouring boy to be, to harrow, sow, to reap and mow, all on her father's land. And it soon she fell in love with him, as you may understand. She courted him for 12 long months, but little did she know that her cruel parents, they would try to prove their overthrow. They watched them close one evening down by some shady grove. Oh, pleading their joys together in the constant bonds of love.
That's a lovely song. Obviously, you know, the labouring boy and the girl, there are plenty of songs that sort of parents separating lovers because they don't think one of them is quite up to snuff with the social status of the other. But it's a good example of things going the other way, because Harry learnt that from an Irishman who used to come and work in East Anglia every year. So that is a song that came via an Irish singer into Harry's repertoire rather than the other way around.
That sort of leads me on to asking where they got their songs from a lot of the time, because they had quite a big repertoire, obviously, and where did it come?
Yeah, they are things in common and there are things that are very different. Both of them learnt songs from relatives, first and foremost. Harry talks about learning songs from his grandfather, his father, his mother. And Sam's the same. Sam learnt a lot of his songs from his uncle Larp in Sutton, who crewed with him on some of the ships. So they learnt songs from family. They learnt songs from friends and the locality. And they learnt songs from written versions of songs. Harry used to get, I've got a picture, but Harry used to get song sheets sent to him by his sister, one of his sisters, probably more than one of his sisters. His mother used to buy song sheets before she was married. When she was going into Norwich, taking stock into Norwich, she would buy song sheets and bring them back. Now, neither Harry or Sam were particularly literate men. Harry eventually taught himself to read, but Sam never really became too literate. So they wouldn't necessarily read the song sheets themselves, but they would learn the songs by somebody else reading the lyrics to them. And both of them would learn songs from music halls. One of Sam's favourite songs is a song called Mignonette, which he learnt probably no more than a decade or so after it was written. It was written in about 1901. And Harry, in his surviving manuscript of songs, he's got a couple of books with songs in about the Titanic sinking, for example, about boxing matches that we can date very specifically to the late 19th or early 20th centuries. And I mean, I don't think Sam ever owned television or a radio, but Harry owned a gramophone. Harry would cycle around with a gramophone strapped to the back of his bike and go to the pub and play records on the gramophone. So he'd learn songs off gramophone records as well.
We've got one of the songs that I think Harry got from his family. It's Georgia Shackleton singing Barton Broad Ditty, and I think he learned that from Bob Cox. Was that a member of his family? His dad. Right, yes. So this is one that Harry got from his dad, Bob Cox.
So at the moment, the Shackleton Trio are recording a third album, and we are including a song from that I learnt from the singing of Harry Cox, the ballad of Barton Broad. However, I have tweaked the tune of this slightly, so don't sing the same tune as Harry, and I've written a chorus to this as well. So I'll give you a little preview of this before we arrange it. It's of an old man in Barton he did dwell. His nickname Snuffers he's known very well. He had it broad till he's fit to go mad. He don't like no man to go out on the bab. 'Bout 8 o'clock on the Broad we did go. Our babs and boats you very well know. Old Snuffers came on pale, angry and white. Said he, young fellows, I know you tonight. Oh, you will not steal my eels, you will not poach my perch, you will not bab on my Broad, and if you do, your name is dirt. He came with his music and he began to play, to frighten those eels all away. He stamped his eels, his pike and his breams, so would know their owners as they swam in the streams. Old Snuffers came on to the Broad one night. We heard him long before he was in sight. He swore we'd damaged his boat and all his nets. Well, he never stood jail and he ran into debt. Oh, but you will not steal my eels, you will not poach my perch, you will not bab on my Broad, and if you do, your name is dirt. He had 2 men locked up for the night. He thought he'd put all the others to fright. The trial came on and he lost the day, and large expenses, oh, he had to pay.
Then off to Norwich he then had to go, to sell his old carrier very well now. To sell his old carrier, his duck and his hen, and fawn on Miss Caven he will if he can.
Oh, you will not steal my eels, you will not poach my perch, you will not bab on my Broad, and if you do, your name is dirt.
You know that we've just watched real folk music in its evolution, haven't we?
Yeah.
That is what folk music is all about.
Absolutely,
Absolutely marvellous.
And you've also just heard possibly the only song in existence written about happenings in Barton Turf.
That is just the focus of folk music, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's to find these wonderful treasures. People love it, by the way. Such a pleasure to listen to. Great song, great voice, watching from New York City. Just ordered the book. Great version of The Wild Rover. It goes on and on. I'm sorry, folks, that I'm not reading every single one out, and there's lots on Facebook too.
Brilliant. Yeah, Harry learned that from his dad, as you say, and his dad says that it was made up when his dad was a boy, so that would date it to about 1830.
I think due to time, we should maybe go on to one that was one of Sam's more popular ones and one of his favourites that he collected, Bob Ridley-O. I think, we'll play that now and we can say a bit about that afterwards.
Okay.
Oh, books, all I'll sing you a ditty. I'm just from home and that's no pity. To praise myself it is a shame, for young Bob Riddledy is my name. And I'm a young Bob Riddledy-O, I'm a young Bob Riddledy-O, I'm a young Bob Riddledy-E-I-O, and I'm a young Bob Riddledy-O. Now I'm just arriving from the mountains. How many miles I didn't count them. I'm just come here, me education, and I'm a young born riddy-dee-o. I'm a young born riddy-dee-o. I'm a young born riddy-dee-E-I-O, and I'm a young born riddy-dee-o.
Yeah, I mean, if you can imagine Sam not aged 80 singing it, as he was then, but aged about 28, on stage in front of hundreds of Scottish and English and Irish fishermen, and tap dancing and jigging and singing his way across the stage, you can get some idea of. But it's a great example. That's an American minstrel song, so probably written maybe 1860, 1870, 1880. Brought over to England, possibly with an American blackface minstrel troupe, and picked up by this young trawlerman from Winterton.
But you can really hear in his performance how much he's trying to get the song across, and it makes me think of something that you say in the book, where you say that the song is in service to Harry, but no, Harry's in service to the song, and Sam. No, you say it. I can't say it.
You did it perfectly well earlier.
You always get the feeling that Harry is in service to the song. He wants to put that song across, whereas the songs are in service to Sam.
That's it.
Sam uses the song to put himself across. Harry, typically when Harry's performing, his eyes are closed and he's sort of heads up, and the room could be empty, and empty or 500 people, he'd be doing the same. Sam is performing, he's constantly glancing. On the BBC documentary, you can see he's focused on the sound man, then he's turning over and having a look at the cameraman, and then he's switching back and looking at the producer, and constantly fixing them, making eye contact, as he would do more as on the big stage.
Well, he won the competition, didn't he, in the Shetland Islands with that song? I think we've got the letter that Tuskin Hodds, his friend, sent back.
Yes, it's a lovely letter. It may not be readable but on screen, but basically Tuskin Hodds was a fellow fisherman of Sam's, and he really, I mean, he had a second career as a PR executive, I think. I mean, it's a lovely letter which he sent back to Winterton, talking about how popular Sam was, and he compares him to Harry Lauder. And at the time, Harry Lauder was probably the biggest popular star in Britain, and he was earning £500 a week. This is in 1908. And so, according to Tuskin, Sam is as big, if not bigger, than Harry Lauder. He is, exceeding Harry Lauder in popularity and in fame and in talent. So when he gets, he's winning prizes. He's having, bunches of carrots hurled at him, sufficient to feed the London Fire Brigade horses. I mean, if you want to measure fame in any sort of realistic term, then how many carrots get thrown at you in one performance that'll keep the London Fire Brigade's horses happy? It's a great letter. It's rather tragic, because Tuskin was one of the trawlermen who didn't make it off the sea to an old age. He was lost at sea at the age of about 28.
Oh.
Sadly, Tuskin is memorialised in Winterton Church's Fisherman's Corner. He's on the memorial plaque to Winterton men lost at sea.
Well, I will just say that I'm very glad that Sam wasn't one of those men, because obviously we wouldn't have got such wonderful music tonight. And I'm just looking at the time now. I'll just say a little bit about how the songs were collected from Harry and Sam, because how did people get those songs and record them and bring them to the public almost?
Yeah, I guess that there are a number of figures that are important. In Harry's case, Alan Lomax, who we mentioned earlier, we mentioned that Lomax is in relation to Leadbelly. Alan Lomax did a lot of interviewing of Harry, either in Norfolk or in Alan Lomax's flat in London, and basically recorded Harry singing a lot of his songs. Ewan MacColl, as I say, recorded Harry singing. Ewan and Peggy Seeger recorded Sam. In fact, they spent, I think, 3 weeks in Winterton recording Sam's memories and songs for the radio ballads. And then there was Philip O'Donnellan from the BBC.
We've got a picture of him. I think we've got a picture of Philip with Sam and Dorcas outside the house.
It's obviously the same day that the previous picture was. Yeah, he's the guy who actually came to Winterton looking for local performers, because he was researching for a BBC radio series, and somebody mentioned Sam to him, and Sam met him in one of the pubs in Winterton. I think it was the Fisherman's Rest, and that was the start of Sam's late flowering career. So really, the collectors for both of them collected them on tape, as it was then. You know, they collected audio.
We've got a clip from Gemma Kawaja of I think it's a reel-to-reel recorder by Sheila Parks, I believe, and she collected that from Harry Cox, and I think we've just got a little snippet of that now.
No, is she? Well, no, I don't think so. Spotted cow. Yeah, his son-in-law was a nice, gentle man. He looked after him. Because Shirley Collins and I and somebody else went to see him. He was still alive then, Harry's son-in-law, and he looked after him when he had cancer. Yeah. He said it was. Yeah, so that's what it is. The first part is on a different speed. Okay. Not lost, my dear. I saw her down in yonder grove. Come, love, and I'll show you down in So you can very faintly hear Harry singing in the background there.
Yeah, and Sheila Parks is lives in Norwich, and she and her I think uncle by marriage, Peter Coleman, is another great singer who's still around and about. They visited Harry a lot in his last few years and recorded him. Harry actually was first recorded in 1934 at the Decca Studios in London. That's the only time I think he ever went into a professional studio. And then later on, he got recorded, say, by the BBC, Hugh McCall, Alan Lomax, and then a lot of enthusiast collectors like Sheila, Bob Pegg, who became a professional singer as well, and others. So he's collected over a period of from the 1930s to about 1971. Sam's recordings are squeezed into a period of about 4 years, from about 57 to 61, and that's it. So we don't hear either of them at their best in their kind of 20s or 30s. And Sam in particular, we're hearing when his voice is not what it was, but there's still strength there and still a storytelling ability from both of them.
Well, and it's folk music.
Yeah.
And that's what folk music is about, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's that storytelling and the ability to carry on for years and years before. Yeah.
I think on that note, we'll play our final song, which is the one that you mentioned before that inspired Martin Carthy, that Sam sung, Henry Martin, or also known as A Tall Lofty Ship, because obviously that had such great storytelling that it inspired not only Martin Carthy, but indirectly Bob Dylan and Paul Simon. So we'll have that one as our final song now.
Okay.
As we were God sailing 5 cold frosty nights, 5 cold frosty nights and 4 days, it was there we espied a lofty tall ship. She came bearing down on us brave boys. Where are you going, you lofty tall ship? How dare you to venture so nigh? For I have turned Robin all on the salt sea. To maintain my two brothers and I.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. That dates back to an event that apparently took place in about 1510, 1511. So it's a very old song, as opposed to old Bob Ridley, which was at the time relatively recent. Yeah.
Well, I think that was a great note to end on, with such a fantastic song. I wish that we had lots more time, because there's so much more to talk about. There's so many things in the book that we couldn't include in this hour and 10 minutes. So I would honestly recommend to anyone who's found this interesting and wants to find out more, just to go and have a look at Bruce's book, because it's brilliant. I loved it. So I just want to say thank you to Bruce. Thank you for coming to talk to us about Sam and Harry. It's been really brilliant. Thank you to Gemma Kawaja and Georgia Shackleton for your recordings. They've really helped the talk, and it's really nice to know that Harry and Sam's music's continuing. And thank you to Tom, Paul, Polly and Amelia for making this event happen today. Thank you.
I'm just going to say too, if I may, to Bruce, that to be reminded of the importance of our sing-arounds and our clubs and the variety that we get and the legacy that leaves. You know, you've really re-established the importance of what traditional and the kind of verbal and oral way that these songs are passed down. And as Vince has said in a message, we shouldn't forget all of the brilliant singers that have contributed to all of this, and the brilliant musicians over the centuries that have never had the profile that Harry and Sam got. But we're all continuing to do it week in, week out, Sunday afternoons in the pub. It's really important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. And thank you to all our viewers and the fantastic comments that we've been getting in. They're brilliant. We've had loads more, and unfortunately, due to time, we can't read them all, but we will read them. Don't worry, just not live. And we're going to end the show today, how Bruce ends his book, with a song called What Will Become of England by, I think, the band Stone Angel. So thank you.
So what will become of England, and how should we go on, if ever we forget to sing the songs of Sam and Harry's song? So